Good morning, I'm Taylor Wilson, and today is Monday, September 15th, 2025. This is USA Today's The Excerpt. Today, what Utah's governor is saying about the suspect in the killing of Charlie Kirk. Plus, why American farmers are warning this year feels especially dire, and we recap an unpredictable Emmys. Trump administration officials, Republican lawmakers, and other supporters gathered at the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C. yesterday to pay tribute to Charlie Kirk after he was shot and killed at a Utah college campus last week. More than an hour before the prayer vigil was scheduled to begin, a line of attendees behind a red velvet rope extended out the door and around the building. Arizona State Senator Jake Hoffman had organized the event and said some 85 members of Congress, Trump administration officials, and other dignitaries were present. Kirk became a national figure as a conservative activist and as the co-founder of Turning Point USA, an organization that pushes for conservative politics on high school and college campuses. He was fatally shot last week at Utah Valley University while kicking off his American Comeback Tour. Meanwhile, Utah Governor Spencer Cox told ABC News this week yesterday that the suspect in custody, 22-year-old Tyler Robinson, is not cooperating with FBI investigators. But he said that the people around him are cooperating, including his romantic partner. He also told NBC's Meet the Press that the suspect was raised by religious parents in a deeply conservative part of Utah and that his ideology was very different than his family. American farmers are feeling squeezed. My colleague Dana Taylor spoke with USA Today Money reporter Bailey Schulz to learn more.
You described this year as especially dire for farmers. What makes 2025 stand out compared to other tough years they've faced?
Farmers are just feeling pretty squeezed this year. So when we're looking especially at crops like soybeans, corn, big crops for the U.S., production costs have just really picked up in recent years, while the prices for selling these has taken a pretty dramatic dip after a few years of just these abundant harvests. So those sort of challenges that we've seen recently continue into 2025. And then on top of that, we're seeing sort of just this increased uncertainty around costs is tied to things like tariffs and these trade wars. And on top of that, we're seeing some farmers who are saying that they've been dealing with weather issues like flooding. And so sort of all of these different pressures that are just compounding and hitting farmers on both sides.
China has turned away from U.S. soybeans this year. How big of a blow is that? And are new trade deals with other countries enough to fill the gap?
So China is a pretty major buyer of soybeans. They're importing about 60% of the world's trade supplies. So major buyer and a big customer for the U.S. But so far this year, China has just declined to purchase any soybeans from U.S. suppliers. Instead, they're turning to South America and particularly Brazil. So we're seeing that the American Soybean Association is warning that the further into the fall that we get without any sort of agreement, the worse this impact is on soybean farmers who, like I said earlier, are already under this financial stress. And so we're seeing that the Trump administration has been trying to work out some deals with the other countries to sort of fill that gap. But when I spoke to experts, there's still a lot of questions on these sort of deals where details so far are pretty scarce on what these deals exactly look like. And we'll have to wait and see on whether or not new deals with other countries will be enough to sort of fill that gap that China is leaving behind.
Relief funds aren't set to arrive until 2026. What are farmers telling you about their ability to survive until then?
I spoke to a farmer who grows corn and soybeans and a couple of other crops out in Arkansas. And for him, his hope is that his creditors are willing to sort of work with him and make sure that he can make it to that help that he's expecting in 2026. But we're hearing that there's a lot of concern, a lot of uncertainty among farmers at this point on just what they will do until that help arrives. We have seen that there are negotiations with other countries, with the White House and the Trump administration, who are trying to get other countries to sort of fill that gap that China is leaving behind. And there have also been comments from officials that the administration is open to providing bailouts for farmers, similar to what we saw with his first administration. But we have yet to hear any official word on new relief payments. So right now, farmers are just kind of in a wait-and-see mode for a lot of this, hoping that there is some sort of avenue for help on the way.
Bailey, beyond the numbers, what ripple effects are you seeing in rural communities as farmers cut back on spending?
The National Corn Growers Association is calling this an economic crisis that's really hitting rural America, but that extends beyond farmers, even beyond rural America potentially. So the economists I spoke to there warned that farmers are just really having to pull back on spending at this point amid all of these economic pressures. And that means that there's less money going into the economy. The farmer in Arkansas that I spoke to, for instance, mentioned that he's been putting off buying on new machinery for the past few years now. And so, yeah, like I said, that just means less money flowing into the economy, less money flowing into local businesses, especially those in those sort of more rural communities.
All right, Bailey Schultz is a money reporter for USA Today. Thank you, Bailey.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Scientists have spotted something unusual in the ocean, and it could be a warning sign of things to come. Warm air dances with cold air, cold water chases warm water. That's all part of a predictable, stable interchange of currents and climate patterns that naturally happen all across the planet until it doesn't. For the first time since records began 40 years ago, the cold, nutrient-rich waters of the Gulf of Panama failed to emerge this year, and scientists aren't sure if it's a fluke or a new normal. Specifically, the Gulf of Panama's seasonal upwelling system has consistently delivered cool, nutrient-rich waters via northerly trade winds every January to April for at least 40 years, but not this year. The findings were reported last week in the peer-reviewed journal Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. You can read more about what the experts are saying with a link in today's show notes. The semicolon is the most feared punctuation for many, and its use is in decline. I chatted with USA Today World Affairs correspondent Kim Hjelmgaard for more. Kim, thank you for joining me, sir. Really fun story.
Wonderful to be here. Thanks so much, and thanks for letting me talk about the semicolon.
Well, I love talking about the semicolon as well. I thought this was a really interesting lane for you to carve out on this one. Kim, going back to the origins here, I mean, how did semicolons become such a common kind of part of American English or English altogether?
It was kind of introduced really through following British English patterns of grammar and so on in the 16th century. But what the historians tell us is that it was actually an Italian who is recognized as the inventor of the semicolon, if we could put it that way. And this is in the late 1400s. He was a scholar, poet from Venice, a guy named Pietro Bembo. He came up with this concept of offering some kind of pause that's longer than a comma. The whole idea was to help readers and writers be able to communicate a little bit more subtly and with more clarity. This same Italian actually invented the italic typeface, which is kind of interesting.
I just want to start with why and really when the semicolon began to fall out of favor, because that's something you focus on in this piece, right?
Yeah, it's kind of been falling out of favor for a long time. I think we can say we got hold of some data from a company that shared their sort of findings with us. It's kind of been a slow, gradual descent, pretty much since the 1800s. A couple hundred years ago, semicolons were everywhere in our books. And today, that's just not the case. And we should probably say, just for context here, Babel, the German language learning company that provided this data for us, a little help from Google, they looked at published American books from the year 1800 to 2022 and sort of went through all this stuff using obviously AI and supercomputers and all the rest of it. When you look around in our world of the way all of us communicate, not just younger folk, a lot of people aren't even using any punctuation these days. It seems to me, when you dash off a message, in some ways, perhaps it's not surprising that the semicolon is kind of being left out in the cold a little bit, so to speak.
Yeah, it's kind of the era of the dash and the ellipse, or any of those. Choose your fighter there. Clearly, you mentioned going back to the 1800s, we've seen this fading. Is there a generational divide, I guess, in the modern era? What do we see among younger Americans?
So one of the interesting things about this data that was collected by the company who also did this kind of survey of younger Americans, 18 to 25. And what they found is that 69-70% of people who took the survey, they kind of confidently strode up to the survey and said, yes, I know how to use a semicolon, no problem. They took the test, which was like an online evaluation, and about the same number this test proved actually had no idea how to use the semicolon, right? I don't know what that says about the psychology of younger Americans or any other Americans for that matter. Extrapolating out from that, some of the experts I spoke to for the story was well, The other number to add into the mix is that more than half of these same people actually thought that semicolon was super important, still had value. So even though they claimed to know how to use it, but they didn't actually know how to use it, they still thought it was important. What that says about how we use language these days, and kind of anyone's guess, really.
Well, you call it a wily punctuation mark. I love that. Is it the half comma, the half period design that makes knowing how and when to use a semicolon so confounding? I mean, what is it about it?
I mean, there are some rules, right? Lots of writers will say they know how to use it, myself included. I think even though we say that, we probably still often use it incorrectly. The way to think of a semicolon is like stronger than a comma. It indicates some kind of pause, typically between two kind of main clauses in a sentence. So you're like separating two things that are kind of connected. That's one way to think about it. The other way to think about it is that, and it's used in this way too, is that it can kind of be used to kind of separate items in a long list of items. So you think about people use bullet points, and they might set out those bullet points with a full colon, so 2 dots, and then, list something, semicolon, another item, semicolon, another item, semicolon. Or you can indeed run those items together in a sentence. I use the word wily because I still think it's kind of misunderstood, even from people like me and others who traffic in words, and, that's our profession. We still constantly kind of get it wrong, but thank God for editors.
Yeah. Well, finally, Kim, I mean, is the semicolon going away altogether? Will some other punctuation mark take its place on our keyboards? Where do you see this going in the coming years and generations?
If you look at the data, the trend line is clearly going towards kind of non-existence. I don't know how long that could take. Could be decades, could be hundreds of years, who knows? The way that, all of us use kind of emojis and other tone characters in the way that we message with one another, you kind of have to think that maybe its shelf life is not that long. I mean, the one example where I think, you do see it around still a little bit in kind of so-called modern speak is the TLDR, too long, didn't read it. That's separated by a semicolon. Whether anyone actually notices that these days, if they still use it and if they text it, I don't know. But there's a lot of big, important texts out there, American text, Declaration of Independence, novels like Moby Dick and so on and so forth, where you did see it. I think one of the interesting things that if you kind of look at more modern literature, you don't notice it as much.
All right. Very fun piece from you, Ken. Thanks for hopping on.
Thanks so much.
Well, it was one of the more unpredictable Emmy Awards in years. After sweeping past ceremonies, The Bear and The White Lotus were sidelined during yesterday's telecast in favor of hot newcomers The Studio and The Pit, which grabbed Best Comedy and Best Drama statues in their first seasons. And first-time host Nate Bargatze pledged to donate $100,000 to Boys and Girls Clubs of America, but warned winners that he would dock money if their speeches ran over 45 seconds. And at just 15 years old, adolescent star Owen Cooper became the youngest male Emmy acting winner in history. You can read more from TV's Big Night on usatoday.com. Thanks for listening to The Excerpt. You can get the podcast wherever you get your audio. And as always, you can email us at podcasts@usatoday.com. I'm Taylor Wilson. I'll be back tomorrow with more of The Excerpt from USA Today.